We're the only people. People walk in, they put a foot in. Please, would you like to register? Other countries, they say, get the hell out of here. They do that. They have to do that. We say, you know, they want to hire now 5,000 more judges so that a person puts the toe in the land that we have to go to trial. This is crazy what we're doing. I don't want judges. I want Border Patrol. I want ICE.
Good morning and welcome to a special 3-hour edition of AM Joy. We are live from Tornillo, Texas, where the Trump administration has erected a tent city near this intake center just along the U.S.-Mexico border to house children who migrated to the U.S. fleeing violence in Central America, only for some of them to be taken from their parents who accompanied them under Donald Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy. In about an hour from now, hundreds of people are expected to rally at this spot to demand that the Trump administration give those kids back to their moms and dads. Overnight, the Trump administration released a statement saying they do know the locations of all of the children in federal custody and that they are working to reunite them with their families. Although a DHS official tells NBC News separated parents were quickly given the option to sign paperwork, leading to deportation, meaning a large percentage of kids in HHS custody may no longer be in the U.S. Officials also released new numbers, claiming that as of June 20th, just over 2,000 minors are being held by the government. As for this facility, there's still a lot that we don't know about it. But according to Democratic lawmakers who've been inside, nearly 300 minors are in there, and at least 7 girls have arrived within just the past 24 hours. Joining me now is Kerry Kennedy, president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Julian Castro, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and the former mayor of San Antonio, Texas, and Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino, which organized today's rally. Thank you all for being here. And Maria Teresa, I'm going to come to you first. So we're here in Tornillo, where we know that there are hundreds of children inside of that facility that's in the distance behind us. We're literally right, we can see Mexico from here.
That's right.
And this is normally an intake facility for immigrants. What do we know about the legal status of those children inside that facility?
I think right now they're still trying to sort it out. A lot of them have been separated from their families, we know that. But for viewers to understand, this tent city for these children, housing minors, was literally erected less than a week ago.
Okay.
And they had 98 children when they first erected. So the fact that it was all of a sudden increased to 300 in less than a week is significant. I was talking to a lot of folks that basically do legal representation for these children. They have not been able to be inside. It's very unusual. Usually when they actually bring in minors, they're allowed to immediately have access to their attorneys. They have not. And the reasoning behind it is that this facility is actually able to expand to 4,000 beds. There's a reason why it's in the middle of the desert, but with a lot of vast opportunity for expansion.
Yeah.
And the thinking is that what they're going to do is they're going to actually transform it into a family detention. That is still prison.
And that's indefinite detention is what they're talking about. And Secretary Castro, they would have to get a ruling, overruling a finding that you cannot indefinitely detain children in order to get that. This is an unprecedented situation. I mean, it's not unprecedented in American history to have internment. However, you're talking about detaining entire families indefinitely in that facility. Unbelievable.
You know, it really is. It is unbelievable. It's amazing that the president believes that the answer to this atrocious policy that he put in place, that the fix to it is to indefinitely cage families together. You know, many folks have spoken about, for instance, a 2016 policy that the Obama administration put in place to keep families together, essentially to use ankle monitors. So basically, you would not keep them in cages indefinitely, but you would allow them with ankle monitors to be able to leave, stay together, but then also have to check in. And that program was very successful. So the point is that there's a different way that we can do this.
Yeah.
We don't have to either separate families or keep them detained indefinitely.
And the program that you're talking about, it was an Obama-era pilot program that kept asylum-seeking migrant families together. The Trump administration canceled it. ICE claimed that it canceled the program because it was too expensive compared with other monitoring methods and because it did not remove enough did not remove enough asylum seekers from the U.S. I believe the cost of it was something like $36 a day per person.
Yeah.
So they're saying it costs too much money.
And this is more, I mean,
This is much more.
This yesterday it was revealed that this is costing $400,000 a day, and it costs $775 a night per kid.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you want to save money and do it more smartly and more humanely, I think the Obama administration showed toward the end of the administration how you could do that.
Absolutely. And Kerry Kennedy, you know, what we know about this Tornillo facility, it's meant to house teenagers aged 13 to 17. It currently houses nearly 300 minors, and as Maria Teresa said, it has the capacity to go up to 4,000 people. One of the things that's been the most disturbing about the detention of these children around the country is the lack of access, that lawmakers are not being given access. The human rights organizations that want to get in and see these kids are not getting full access. Is there a way to change that?
Yeah, well, the way to change it is to go back to the Obama-era policy, and that's what we should do. We don't want internment camps in the United States. We want a country that's based on love and justice and peace and compassion towards those who suffer. That's what Americans are yearning for, and that's not what this is. You know, yesterday we were in McAllen. I went to the courthouse. I saw scores of people, asylum seekers who have a right to be in this country, who had been turned away at the border by border police who told them, we don't have enough people to process you, so you have to go through the Rio Grande to get into the United States. They risk their lives, almost drowning. Some of them drown. They come across, and they're met by scores and scores of people who immediately arrest them, put them into shackles at their ankles, at their hands, around their waist, these huge bicycle chains, and bring them in and process them like criminals for what is essentially a traffic violation. This is a misdemeanor crime, and they're in these shackles. The humiliation, the terror of these poor people, and then having their children stripped from them. And this is not just a border issue. This is an issue across our country. These kids have been taken to 15 different states, as far away as New York. And it's very, very clear that the federal government has no idea what to do. They threw together this policy. They don't know where the kids are. They don't know how to match the parents with the children, and it's a disaster.
And, you know, so a couple things to unpack there. Secretary Castro, I think a lot of people are asking, I'm just sort of now going by the questions I'm getting. People are texting me and tweeting me and asking, number one, why scatter the children around the country? Why send them? I mean, is it a matter of making it harder for them to be found by the parents? Why scatter them?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I think that probably, as Maria Teresa alluded to, it's probably a matter of space right now and places to house these kids. But the other answer to that, I think, is that this was a half-baked measure. It was done in a haphazard way. Incompetence is sort of the standard operating procedure of this administration. And so if they were going to take this policy on and know they're going to have a surge of these minors to house, they could have done that in a more orderly way. And I'll say, whether it was Republican or Democrat in the past, usually when policies like this come down the pipe, it was done in a more orderly way, whether it's this or the travel ban that we saw at the very beginning of the administration. This is an administration whose standard operating procedure is chaos and incompetence. And because of that, I think that's part of the reason that you see folks everywhere, and now a lack of effective ability to track parents with children. Yeah, well, I mean, as our colleague Chris Hayes has said, there's a through line between the incompetencies that go to Puerto Rico, that go to the Muslim ban. There is a certain through line that one could see. But the other thing, Maria Teresa, is that what Kerry Kennedy said is important. These are asylum seekers. So these are people. This is a border intake facility behind us. Normally, it would be processing people who are coming and presenting themselves. So people who are presenting themselves for asylum are not lawbreakers. They actually have an international human rights case to make, and they're being told, you can't come in, we're closed. And then when they go around and present themselves and say, no, I am seeking asylum, they're turning themselves in and then getting arrested.
And I think that something that we should be very clear is that we in the United States, we helped craft this international law. We were one of the folks that were at the table when we said, this is actually how you treat refugees, the XYZ. So we right now are actually going against our own ethos, against the laws that we actually created on the international order. And I do caution Americans who think that this is okay, because right now we are setting a standard for other countries to treat their minorities and refugees in incredibly abysmal conditions. And we do not want to set that off. We have to have a responsibility as a world leader to continue that we are talking about our values. And there's a reason why Americans, regardless of party, are outraged. Because this is not who we are. This idea that you have 20 children in cages without anyone able to soothe them because it's against federal law to touch them.
And they can't hug each other.
And they can't hug each other is abysmal, and it's cruel. And it takes a high level of depravity to actually come up with a policy like that.
Yeah, and can you just reiterate for us, Carrie Kennedy, what are the normal protocols? I mean, you work with a human rights organization for refugees, for people typically presenting themselves for asylum in the United States.
Well, you have a right to asylum under international law, as Maria Teresa was just saying. That was crafted by Lou Hankin, an American lawyer on behalf of our country. And so if you have a well-founded fear of persecution based on race, creed, color, national origin, or political belief, which almost all these people do, you have a right to get asylum in the United States, and we are denying that right, and we're breaking international law.
Yeah.
But I want to add something else. I think what I've heard from people across the country is, what can I do?
Yeah.
I want to get involved. So we have started in conjunction with the civil rights lawyers for civil rights here in the Valley, and Lupe, which is also an organization started by Cesar Chavez, something called Break Bread, Not Families. And it's a fast that you do for 24 hours. We're doing it over 24 days. And you do the fast for 24 hours, and then you pass it along to someone else.
Yeah.
And you take the money you were going to spend on food that day and send it in to Break Bread, Not Families. And we pass it along to people on the ground, making a difference, reuniting these families.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that Maria Teresa and Juan it's come in are part of the fast as well.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about what's going to happen today? But well, actually, before we do that, I want to address one of the other issues that I'm hearing a lot of people very worried about, and I'll throw this out to anyone who can address it. The idea that once parents are deported, then the children are reclassified as unaccompanied.
Yeah.
And then the parents' claim to the child is questioned, because then they are perceived as having abandoned the child, or at least when the courts look at their claim, they say, well, you abandoned the child.
Well, the most recent case that we heard of was literally a mother who had to sue the federal government to get her child back.
Right.
She's a refugee. She does not have resources, and luckily lawyers and Better Angels came up and said we have to sue. How many parents are going to be able to go through that process to actually be able to match someone that can actually navigate through it so that they can sue to get their child back? It's unfathomable that we are so incompetent that we can actually recognize just basic justice.
Yeah.
And when we made a mistake.
Yeah. Can we talk about what's going to happen today? What are we going to see today?
Yeah, so we're going to see a rally that we expect at least hundreds of folks to come to keep the pressure up on the Trump administration. People coming from all over the country, and including, of course, here locally from around El Paso, with a number of speakers. And the message today really is that we want these families reunited.
Yeah.
The only way that that's going to happen is if we keep up the pressure. The Trump administration only reversed course, sort of, because of the immense pressure that they felt. And the only way that they're going to actually implement a policy to reunite these families is if we keep that pressure up.
Yeah.
And, you know, my kudos to Voto Latino for really organizing this over the last few days.
But I have to say that we started this as an idea on Sunday, and it was because we saw so many people, so many Americans, again, regardless of political stripes, who were angry. And we said the only way that we could actually bring attention to the very first internment camp of children is to go there. It's far away, hard to get to on purpose.
Yeah.
And it's by design. So we encourage folks to visit stopseparation.org. We have identified local groups here in El Paso who desperately need resources so that they can help the children.
Yeah.
And if you can go ahead and follow us a little bit on Facebook, learn more about what we're happening. I have to say that, as Julian said, we have people coming from all stretches of the country to be here to set off a week of action. And the idea behind it is that end family detention. It starts in Tornillo, but it ends in Washington, D.C. next Saturday, June 30th, because we recognize that it has to be a march, but more importantly, we know that what's happening here, we have to bear witness to it.
Absolutely.
But the only way that we fix it is through members of Congress and this administration.
And by the way, before we go, if you can see, I don't know if we can get a wide shot of it, this is the border. Mexico is right there. You can see those mountains there. And as a former mayor of a city here in Texas, just give people a sense of scale, because the perception that we're getting out of the Trump administration is that there is almost a barrage, a constant torrent of people flooding into the country. No torrent. We don't see a torrent. We do not see a barrage.
The other misperception that he fans the flames of is that somehow that these cities like El Paso on the American side are run over with crime. El Paso, as Congressman Beto O'Rourke makes clear all the time, who represents this area, is one of the safest big cities in the United States. It's got about 650,000 folks, and it consistently ranks as one of the safest big cities, and it butts up against the border, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit more about how people can contact the human rights organization that you're working with?
Yeah, so I work with Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, but they should really go to breakbreadnotfamilies.org and sign up for the fast and get others involved. And that's really, we need a grassroots movement. As we just heard, this administration bows to pressure, and we need to keep that pressure on. We want to do two things. We want to reunite those families, but we don't want to reunite them in internment camps. President Trump said, don't worry, we're going to bring those families back together. But he didn't say we're taking the 4, 5, and 6-year-olds out of cages. His plan is to keep them in cages. I think it's supposed to be 116 degrees here. In today.
And just add their parents to the cages.
They're adding the parents to the cages. Everybody should be free. The Obama program had 99.6% of the time the families showed up for their hearings. So it's a program that works. It's very inexpensive. This program's going to cost $280,000 per child per year to keep them in this desert. My God, let these people free.
As a way for him to force Congress to give him $25 million for a wall Mexico, he said was going to pay for. Kerry Kennedy, thank you very much. Julian Castro, thank you very much. Maria Teresa Kumar will be back with me. Thank you very much, sister. Appreciate it. And up next, our own Jacob Soboroff joins me with more of his amazing reporting, his brilliant reporting on the crisis at the border. Stay with us.
You're talking about murders. You're talking about very, very violent criminals.
Do you know how many MS-13 members you caught here?
That have made it through? I can tell you right now we're looking at a 300% increase over last year.
And how many people is that?
Comes out to about 100 and, I think it's 180.
And how many total people did you catch last year?
Last year we had 187,000 people.
Welcome back to our 3-hour special edition of AM Joy, live from Tornillo, Texas. Now, although the White House and its allies routinely use MS-13 to fearmonger and to justify their immigration crackdown, in fact, MS-13 and criminal gang arrests make up just a tiny fraction of the total apprehensions at the border. Jacob Soboroff unpacks that and much more in a new Dateline special, The Dividing Line, which airs tonight at 7 p.m. on NBC. And Jacob joins me now. So, Jacob, let's first of all start with some facts on MS-13. Donald Trump loves to use them as a talking point in his speeches. His allies and conservative media talk about them constantly. What is MS-13, and is it a Central American invasion of the United States?
All right, so let's start at the beginning. MS-13 is a Los Angeles street gang that began in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven in Koreatown in the city of Los Angeles. And during the Clinton administration, many members of that gang who were undocumented immigrants were deported to Central America. Terrorized residents of Central America, expanded massively, and then caused some of the migrant refugee crisis that we're seeing on our borders today. So the American policy of deporting these folks, instead of just locking them up in our jails and then deporting them or figuring out a different strategy, is what caused some of what we're dealing with right now. I want to be really, really clear about what you just heard from Manuel Padilla, the Border Patrol Sector Chief, in our Dateline special. You'll hear more of it tonight. He said 180 of 187,000 people they caught are MS-13 members. The whole policy of separating children and locking them up is predicated.
Can you say that number again? 180 out of
187,000. So I'm not very good at math, but I believe that is 0.1%, Joy, of all the people apprehended in the Rio Grande Valley sector were MS-13 members. And this whole thing was predicated by Donald Trump on the idea that people are fraudulently coming into the United States, and that's why we have to separate families and lock up children. The math is funny math, fuzzy math, and it doesn't make any sense based on the statistics that we know about.
And beyond that, let's talk about what people actually are fleeing. We know that there is something called the Northern Triangle that is in Central America, that a lot of these families are coming from places like Guatemala and El Salvador. Can you explain, and does your special go into some detail on what it is these families are actually fleeing?
Desperation. They're fleeing gang violence. They're fleeing persecution, and they want a better life in the United States, which has historically been a welcoming place for migrants from around the world who are looking to seek asylum and have a better tomorrow. And so when you hear, again, the administration say you have fake families coming into the U.S., fraudulent family units that are really terrorists or gang members, the percentage on that one is 1%. 1% of all of the families caught in the Rio Grande Valley sector, the epicenter of this migrant crisis, we'll talk about it tonight on Dateline, are false. 1% of all of the families. And again, based on that 1% statistic, the president and his administration decided in a systematic way, in a way that's never been done before, to separate families from children, resulting in today, 2,000 kids, 2,053 to be exact, according to the numbers from the administration, potentially never being reunited with their parents again, because I was told this morning by Homeland Security that a large percentage of those parents may already have been deported back to their home countries.
That is one of the things that I think has been the most disturbing, Jacob, that, per your reporting this morning. And the idea that parents of these 2,000 plus kids may already be outside of the United States, because it's not clear what the process would be for them to get back into an American courtroom to claim their children or to even locate them.
That's correct. I mean, again, these are not folks that are wealthy individuals. They're some of the most desperate, poor people in the world, quite frankly, and that's why they're coming here. So when you get deported from the United States after coming here to try to seek asylum, albeit in between ports of entry, then you're kicked out of the country and your child remains effectively incarcerated, or at least in the custody of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. What are you supposed to do? You don't have the resources to pick up the phone, to hire a high-priced attorney in order to go and track down your children. And these phone numbers, these 1-800 numbers that HHS is saying, are provided to be reunited. What do you do when you're in Central America and trying to dial these numbers and trying to figure out where your child is?
Yeah, and the other issue, of course, is Mexico, which is where many of these families are traversing through Mexico to get to the United States. Can you get into a little bit of the situation there? Because it's not as if it's easy to get through Mexico, even to get to the United States in the first place.
So Mexico is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and that is fair. Donald Trump makes very clear that he feels like the reason we need a wall and the reason we need to incarcerate children separated from their parents is because Mexico's violent, and he thinks that that may be spilling over into the United States. We go to the morgue in the special tonight in Tijuana, the most violent city in Mexico, where 6 people are murdered a day. It's absolutely overflowing, over 1,700 murders last year alone. This year is expected to be on pace to pass that. But guess what, Joy? If the president took the time to pick up his own DEA reports and read maybe 1 page or 2 pages of those annual reports, he would learn that spillover violence is not something that happens in the United States. Tijuana, Reynosa, Juarez are dangerous cities in Mexico. But on the other side of the border, San Diego, McAllen, El Paso, those are some of the safest big cities in the United States of America. He's ignoring the statistics his own government puts out in order to cherry pick and put forward fraudulent facts to make border policy. And that's how we got here today. And it wasn't just Trump. You know, we have had deterrence as a border policy for over 20 years, starting in the Clinton administration. It's resulted in people dying in the desert, going around at existing infrastructure, trying to run away from the Border Patrol, and a failure to address that is how we ended up with kids in cages, over the course of the last week.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that Mexico has elections coming up. Not having a great relationship with the U.S. administration doesn't exactly make it easy for them to cooperate in trying to solve some of these problems. Jacob Soboroff, thank you so much for all the reporting that you have done on this issue. Thank you very much. We'll be watching tonight.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you. And don't miss Jacob tonight on Dateline at 7 p.m. Eastern. Put this in your DVR, mark it, watch it. It is very important for you to get the background on this. The border special is called The Dividing Line. It's on NBC tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. And up next, a closer look at America's ugly legacy, yes, of separating children from their families. Welcome back to our special 3-hour edition of AM Joy, live from Tornillo, Texas, where hundreds of people are expected to rally at this spot to advocate for children who remain in limbo, separated from their families. Outcry over the separation of thousands of migrant children from their parents has elicited online rumors and fears of forced adoptions. NBC cannot substantiate these claims, but many are citing the case from 2012 as a cause for concern. And this is the case. A Guatemalan mother who lost a legal battle to regain custody of her 5-year-old son. He was put up for adoption after she was arrested on immigration charges. MSNBC legal analyst Danny Ceballos is joining me now to add some clarity to the issue. All right, Danny, so this was a case of a Guatemalan mom who was arrested in an immigration raid. This case played out in 2012 as she appealed after her child was put up for adoption and she was claimed to have abandoned the child. A lot of people worrying about that and sharing that story. The mother ultimately lost her bid to get her child back from the American parents who had adopted him without her consent. And there is a new story out in AL.com that's also being shared. And this is the quote from it, Danny, that is scaring a lot of people out there. It says, I think what we'll see potentially is an increase in children unable to be placed at homes with relatives and being placed in foster families or facilities, according to Carlos Aleman, who's the deputy director of the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama. And here's the quote, Danny, and then they can be adopted out of foster care by people who are not their relatives. Should people be worried about that kind of an outcome here?
Yes, and that's based on my personal experience handling these dependency type cases, is that federal and state law require the state to initiate termination of parental rights proceedings if a child has been in foster care for a certain percentage of the last 23 months. So the reason that's concerning is as soon as you hear the words foster care, that should make everybody very concerned. And it's especially concerning with the case of immigrant children, mostly because even though the courts on appeal will preserve parental rights, on the other hand, immigrants who are returned to their countries have little opportunity or finances to hire a stateside attorney and assert those parental rights in an appellate proceeding. So that should have people very, very concerned.
And so, Danny, what we're seeing here is the NBC News confirming the federal government saying that many of the parents who have been separated from their children may have already been deported. They may already be outside the United States. So that's, put a pin in that. The second piece, that there are a lot of infants that we do not know where they are. There have been a lot of people asking where the little girls and the little infants are. We know that they're being held. Jacob Soboroff has seen some of them on their own in these sort of caged facilities. So is the big concern here that those infants, that those babies, if they get placed in foster care and are left there for a certain period of time, that those parents may never see those children again because, as you said, their parental rights get terminated because they've literally been taken out of the country?
Yes, the law expresses a preference for placement with relatives. So it may be the case that that some of the immigrants are being returned voluntarily. Perhaps they would prefer that to any jail term, and they would just rather be returned to their country and then figure out reuniting with their children later. We just don't know. But as I've said before, the placement, once a child is placed in foster care, the chief concern is, and I've seen this personally, is that foster parents become attached to the child. Whoever the child is placed with becomes attached. And they may initiate adoption proceedings. When that happens, if there is no original parent, to contest them because that parent has been removed from the United States, then it becomes significantly easier to adopt that child. But, you know, even before adoption begins, initiating the termination of parental rights is something that is required by federal law. It's required by state law. And the state must initiate those if there is what is considered statutory abandonment. The cruel irony here is that statutory abandonment may apply if a person is incarcerated for a crime, but it could also apply if a person is removed from the United States or even in custody in a federal detention center.
Wow. This has not been a reassuring conversation, Danny Cevallos. That is pretty scary, and hopefully there are some smart legal minds out there like yours that are thinking about ways to get in touch with these parents, to find them and help them to preserve their rights to their own kids. Pretty scary. MSNBC's Danny Cevallos in McAllen, Texas, thank you so much for that information. Thank you. Wow, much more special coverage from the border after break. Wow.
Consistent with our American values.
In effect, put in cages and then sent to camps. That's not American.
The separation of families needs to stop. That's not the America the world knows and loves.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Today from Tornillo, Texas, one of the epicenters of the family separation crisis that has sparked outrage all over the country, really indeed all over the world. Yet the idea that this is unprecedented and not who we are as Americans is unfortunately a bit of revisionist history. The truth is, taking children away from their parents by government sanction or detaining them in internment camps has happened in America since its founding. For centuries, the children of enslaved Americans, African and African American, were taken from their parents and sold off on the auction block, with their families scattered at the whim of enslavers. In the late 19th century, tens of thousands of Native American children were taken from their families and forced to attend assimilation boarding schools. And during World War II, Japanese Americans were ordered to live in isolated prison camps, including an estimated 30,000 children. And joining me now is Jelani Cobb, staff writer for The New Yorker and Columbia University professor. Jelani, thank you so much for being here. I want to read to you a little bit of an account of a guy named Henry Bibb, a former enslaved person, and this is from an 1849 narrative, which was exhibited at the Smithsonian's Museum of African American History and Culture. This is what it read. This is in the Washington Post on May 31st. The child was torn from the arms of its mother amid the most heart-rending shrieks from the mother and child on the one hand, and the bitter oaths and cruel lashes from the tyrants on the other. Her mother was sold to the highest bidder. So clearly we have a history here. It is shocking to a lot of people that we're repeating it, but separating kids is unfortunately not un-American, is it?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that we've seen in the past 2 years that people have referred to as un-American, and the only reason we can think of them as un-American is that we have been reluctant to take a cold, hard look at what the history of the United States actually is. This is just simply the most recent example. And so these are things we might wish were un-American, or these are things that are contrary to the version of America that we have sold and dispensed to the world. But there are deep historical roots to these kinds of actions. And as a matter of fact, you know, to show the kind of level of depravity that was involved in the institution of slavery, it was common enough for people to have had their children sold away from them that at the end of the Civil War, when African Americans had gained their freedom, however tenuous that freedom was, one of the things that you find again and again and again from reports is these southern roads that are congested with people who are wandering from town to town, state to state, city to city, trying to find relatives who've been sold away from them. And so this is very deep in American history. And you mentioned the example of the normal schools with Native Americans who were kind of force-fed a kind of cultural assimilation and separated from their families in order to expedite that process. Even in the kind of more recent administrative forms of child separation, what's come out, and the New York Times did a study of this, did a report on this a while back, is that there are racial disparities and even instances where children are taken out of homes because of concerns about abuse or other issues, and that black children and white children who are in the same circumstances, black children are far more likely to be taken away from parents, even for offenses that might be comparatively minor. And so there is this long dynamic that we should be clear about. And the only way that we can have any sense of hoping to avoid the repetition of this is to be clear about what has actually happened in the past.
Yeah, and I'm going to read another very quickly. This is from the Forced Assimilation of Border Schools. This is from NPR in May 2008. Bill Wright, a Patwin Indian, was sent to the Stewart Indian School in Nevada. He was just 6 years old. Wright remembers matrons bathing him in kerosene and shaving his head. Students at federal boarding schools were forbidden to express their culture, everything from wearing long hair to speaking even a single Indian word. Wright said he lost not only his language, but also his American Indian name. I remember coming home and my grandma asked me to talk Indian to her, he said, and I said, "Grandma, I don't understand you." She said, "Then who are you?" There are stories of Japanese American children waited to turn 18 so they could volunteer to fight for the U.S. to prove their family's loyalty, despite not wanting to be separated from their parents. Kiyoshi Miranga, whose family was interned at Grenada Relocation Center in Colorado during the U.S. Army and was killed in Italy. And one last story, and this is more recent. This is a child named Carlos, whose name was changed to Jameson. We were just talking about it in the last block, by a family called the Mosers. He had been with his adopted parents in Carthage, Missouri since the age of 11 months. The judge said his biological mother had no rights to even see him. According to her lawyer, she was arrested in an immigration raid in 2007 at a chicken processing plant. His name was changed, his culture was changed, he's gone. How do we as Americans, Jelani, who oppose this, other than Republicans, who a plurality unfortunately are for it, if you look at the polling, the vast majority of everyone else is against it. How do people process this idea that this should not be who we are with the knowledge that we've been this way in the past?
I mean, this is only understandable by the relative parameters of humanity. Whose humanity are we able to visibly recognize and whose are we not? And there are examples, abundant examples of this. Even when we talked, an example that I've given to students in class about the My Lai massacre and the fact that there were children killed, and that there were very many Americans who felt that the soldiers who were court-martialed as a result of that had been given the kind of unjust treatment. Whereas we would have, it would be incomprehensible that there could be any defense for anyone who had killed an American child for any circumstances, for any reason, under any circumstances. And so it is simply fundamentally this. And I think that the question is, ask yourself, Republican, what is your relationship to your child? What would you do to protect that child? How far would you go to make sure that you reunited yourself with a child, with your offspring, your progeny, your family? And then ask yourself if you can apply that same visceral sense of protection and love to someone who doesn't look like you. And that's the fundamental question.
Jelani Cobb, as usual, distilling things down to their essence in a brilliant way. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you very much for being here today. Thank you. And up next, more live coverage from Tornillo, Texas. Within moments from now, a rally is set to begin. We are going to bring it to you live as it happens.